My wife called the cops on me for attacking her, but when they learned what she did to me, they arrested her instead. I met Rachel at my brother's wedding, where she was a bridesmaid and I was a groomsman. She was beautiful and funny, and everyone loved her energy. We dated for 2 years and got married when we were both 28. I worked as an electrician, and she worked in retail management. The first year was mostly good, except Rachel had a temper when things didn't go her way. She'd throw the remote when her show got canceled. She'd slam doors when I disagreed with her. She'd break dishes when dinner wasn't what she wanted. I figured everyone had bad days and tried to be understanding. Year 2 is when the hitting started. The first time was when I forgot to pick up her dry cleaning. She slapped me across the face and immediately started crying, saying I made her do it by being thoughtless. I was shocked, but she seemed so sorry that I let it go. The second time was when I went out with coworkers after work without texting her first. She punched me in the stomach and said I was probably cheating. When I doubled over, she said I was being dramatic about a little tap. After that, it became regular. If I loaded the dishwasher wrong, she'd hit my arms. If I didn't want to watch her shows, she'd kick my legs. If I were too tired for sex, she'd scratch my back until it bled. She always had a reason why it was my fault. I was too stupid, too slow, too selfish, too pathetic. She'd hurt me, then tell me I was lucky she put up with me because no other woman would want such a useless husband. I tried to tell my friend Jake once, and he laughed, saying he wished his wife would rough him up a little. I tried to tell my brother Adam, and he said Rachel was 5 feet 2 and 100 pounds, so how bad could it be? Rachel was small, but she knew how to hurt people. She'd wait until I was relaxed or sleeping, then attack. She'd use objects like shoes or books or her curling iron once. She'd go for sensitive spots like kidneys and ribs in the back of my head. Then she'd act normal in public like the perfect wife. People would compliment me on finding such an amazing woman. Rachel started getting bolder. She'd hurt me right before we went to see family, so I'd be in pain during dinner. She'd do it before work, so I'd struggle through my shift. My coworkers started noticing me wincing and limping. My supervisor, Glenn, asked if everything was okay at home, and Rachel had trained me so well that I said yes automatically. The worst was when she'd hurt me, then immediately want comfort. She'd beat me with a belt, then crawl into bed crying about her stressful day and demand I hold her. If I didn't comfort her after she hurt me, she'd get even more violent. I started sleeping in my truck some nights just to get peace. Rachel would blow up my phone with threats about what she'd do when I came home. Year 4 was when I started fighting back. Not hitting her, just defending myself. I'd grab her wrist when she swung at me. I'd block her kicks. I'd lock myself in the bathroom when she got violent. This made Rachel furious. She said I was abusing her by restraining her. She said I was the violent one for leaving marks on her wrists when I stopped her from hitting me. She started telling her sister Kelly that I was getting rough with her. Kelly believed every word because why would Rachel lie? The ending came on a Thursday night. Rachel was mad because I'd gotten a raise at work and she hadn't at hers. She said I probably slept with my boss to get it. My boss, Glenn, was a 60-year-old grandfather. Rachel threw a glass at my head, and it shattered against the wall. She grabbed a piece and came at me with it. I pushed her away and ran to the bedroom to pack a bag. I was done. I was leaving. Rachel called 911 and said her husband was attacking her. She said I'd thrown glass at her and pushed her down. She said she was scared for her life. The cops showed up within minutes, and I was still packing when they arrived. Rachel had scratched her own arms and messed up her hair. She was crying and shaking and pointing at me, saying I'd gone crazy. The officers separated us, and one took me outside while the other talked to Rachel. Officer Torres asked me what happened, and I started to explain, but he was already looking at me like I was guilty. Then he told me to roll up my sleeves to check for defensive wounds. That's when he saw the bruises all up my arms. Fresh ones, old ones, yellowing ones. He asked about my neck, and I showed him the scratch marks. He asked about my torso, and I lifted my shirt to show the boot print on my ribs from last week. Officer Torres called his partner outside and they looked at all my injuries. Rachel didn't have a mark on her except the scratches she'd done to herself, which were obviously fresh and in places she could reach. The glass was on my side of the room, not hers. There was blood on the wall where it had cut my scalp. The officers went back inside and I heard Rachel scream. Officer Torres came back out and told me they were arresting Rachel for domestic violence and assault. I watched through the window as his partner put handcuffs on my wife while she screamed that I was lying. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists and she jerked against them like she could break free. She was yelling that I attacked her first, that I threw the glass at her, that she was defending herself. The second officer kept telling her to calm down, but Rachel just screamed louder. They walked her out to the patrol car, and I stood there on my front lawn watching my wife get arrested. She twisted around to look at me and her face was red and wet with tears. She mouthed something I couldn't hear through the car window. The patrol car pulled away and I could still see her screaming inside it until they turned the corner. Officer Torres touched my shoulder and said we needed to go to the hospital. My head was bleeding pretty bad from where the glass cut my scalp and it wouldn't stop. Blood was dripping down the side of my face and soaking into my shirt collar. He helped me into his patrol car and drove me to the emergency room. The whole ride, I kept touching the cut on my head and my fingers kept coming away red. Officer Torres kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror asking if I was okay. I didn't know how to answer that. At the hospital, he walked me into the ER and stayed with me during intake. The nurse took my vitals and kept asking what happened. Officer Torres explained while the nurse wrote everything down. Then he took out his phone and started photographing my injuries. He took pictures of my arms with all the bruises. He took pictures of my neck with the scratch marks. He took pictures of my ribs with the boot print. The ER doctor came in and examined me with this gentle touch that surprised me. She cleaned the cut on my scalp and said it needed stitches. While she worked on my head, she found more bruises across my torso and arms and back. Some were fresh and purple. Some were yellow and green from healing. Some were almost faded completely. She asked how long this had been happening, and I heard myself say 4 years. 4 years of Rachel hitting me and hurting me and telling me it was my fault. The doctor wrote everything down for the police report. She asked about specific injuries, and I told her the truth for the first time ever. I told her about the belt and the curling iron and the kicks to my legs. I told her about sleeping in my truck to avoid going home. I told her about the boot print on my ribs from last week when I didn't want to watch her show. The doctor's face stayed calm, but I could see something in her eyes. Officer Torres photographed everything she found. When the doctor finished stitching my head, Officer Torres sat down next to me. He explained that Rachel would be held overnight at the jail and arraigned in the morning. He said I needed to decide about getting a restraining order. I sat there in the hospital room trying to understand that my wife was in jail because of what she did to me. Part of me felt this huge relief, like I could finally breathe. But another part felt guilty, like I'd done something wrong by letting the police arrest her. Officer Torres must have seen something on my face because he told me this wasn't my fault. He said what Rachel did was assault, and it was illegal no matter who did it. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed him yet. A woman knocked on the door and came in with a folder full of papers. She introduced herself as the hospital social worker. She had information about domestic violence resources and support groups. She handed me pamphlets about shelters and counseling and legal help. One pamphlet was specifically for male victims and had a support group that met every week. I took the papers and held them in my hands. The social worker kept talking about services available and people who could help. I heard the words, but they felt far away. The whole idea that I was a domestic violence victim seemed wrong somehow. Rachel was 5'2" and 100 pounds. I was 6 feet tall and worked construction. How could I be the victim? But my ribs hurt where she kicked me. My head throbbed where she threw glass at me. My arms were covered in bruises from her hitting me. The social worker must have seen me struggling because she said abuse isn't about size or strength. She said it's about power and control. She said what happened to me was real and serious and I deserved help. Officer Torres drove me to my brother Adam's house because I couldn't go home. The house was a crime scene now, and they needed to finish processing it. It was 2 in the morning when we pulled up to Adam's place. Officer Torres walked me to the door and waited while I rang the bell. Adam opened the door in his pajamas looking confused and worried. He took one look at my bandaged head and all the visible bruises and his face changed. He pulled me into a hug right there in the doorway. He kept saying he was sorry over and over. Sorry for not believing me when I tried to tell him. Sorry for saying Rachel was too small to really hurt me. Sorry for not taking it seriously. Officer Torres handed Adam his card and told him to call if there were any problems. Then he left, and it was just me and Adam standing in his living room at 2 in the morning. Adam set me up on his couch with blankets and pillows. He made coffee even though it was the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep anyway, so we sat there drinking coffee while the sun came up. Adam asked me to tell him everything, and for once I did. I told him about the first time Rachel hit me 4 years ago. I told him about how it got worse and worse. I told him about the belt and the shoes and the curling iron. I told him about her waiting until I was asleep to attack me. I told him about going to work injured and lying to Glenn when he asked if I was okay. I told him about sleeping in my truck because I was scared to go home. I didn't minimize it or make excuses or try to protect Rachel. I just told the truth. Adam listened and didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said he wished I'd told him sooner, but he understood why I didn't. He said from now on he believed me and he'd help however he could. The next morning, Officer Torres called my phone. Rachel had been arraigned and released on bail with a no-contact order. That meant she couldn't come near me or the house or try to contact me in any way. If she did, she'd go back to jail. Officer Torres said I should be safe, but to call immediately if Rachel tried to reach me. After I hung up, I felt panic rising in my chest. Rachel was out there somewhere. She was angry and she knew where I was staying because Adam's house wasn't a secret. The no-contact order was just a piece of paper. What if she decided to ignore it? What if she came here? Adam saw my face and told me to breathe. He said Rachel wouldn't risk going back to jail by violating the order. He said we'd keep the doors locked, and if anything happened, we'd call the police right away. Later that morning, Adam drove me back to the house with Officer Torres meeting us there. Rachel wasn't allowed to be at the house, so this was my chance to pack clothes and essentials. Walking through the front door felt wrong. This was my home, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Every room held memories of violence I'd tried to pretend wasn't that bad. The living room where Rachel threw the remote at my head. The kitchen where she hit me with a wooden spoon. The bedroom where she'd attack me while I slept. Officer Torres stayed with me while I packed a duffel bag with clothes and toiletries. Adam helped me gather important documents and medications. I moved through the house quickly, wanting to get out as fast as possible. I went into the bedroom to get more clothes and saw Rachel's nightstand. I shouldn't have looked, but I opened the drawer and found her journal. The leather one she wrote in every night before bed. I picked it up and flipped it open. Officer Torres and Adam were in the other room, so I started reading. Rachel had written about me in detail. She wrote about being angry that I got promoted when she didn't. She wrote about how I deserved to be hurt for being thoughtless. She wrote about hitting me and justified it by listing all the things I'd done wrong. The way she described hurting me was so casual, like it was normal relationship stuff. Like hitting your husband with a belt was the same as having an argument. My stomach turned reading her words. She really believed I deserved everything she did to me. She really thought the violence was justified. I closed the journal and put it back in the drawer. Adam called from the hallway asking if I was ready. I grabbed the rest of my clothes and we left. I stayed at Adam's place for 3 more days, sleeping on his couch and trying to figure out what came next. My phone kept buzzing with texts from work, and I knew I couldn't avoid dealing with reality much longer. On Saturday morning, I sent Glenn a message saying I needed a few days off for a family emergency. He texted back within 5 minutes asking if I was okay and if there was anything he could do. I stared at those words for a long time. Glenn had asked me months ago if everything was all right at home, and I'd lied straight to his face because Rachel had trained me so well. Now he was offering help again, and I was tired of lying. I called him instead of texting. Glenn answered on the second ring, and I could hear his grandkids playing in the background. I told him everything, starting with Rachel throwing the glass and ending with her getting arrested. There was silence on the other end for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Glenn said he'd suspected something was wrong for over a year. He'd noticed me flinching when people moved too fast near me. He'd seen me struggle to lift equipment because of injuries I tried to hide. He said he didn't know how to ask without making things worse, and he was sorry he hadn't pushed harder. He approved paid leave for as long as I needed, no questions asked. The relief I felt hearing that made my throat tight. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman introduced herself as a victim advocate from the prosecutor's office. She explained that Rachel had been charged with assault and domestic violence, but they needed me to decide if I wanted to participate in the criminal case. I could press charges or I could decline, and either way the state might proceed based on the evidence. The advocate was patient while I sat there not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted Rachel to face real consequences for 4 years of hurting me. Part of me felt sick thinking about her going to jail or having a criminal record because of me. The advocate said I didn't need to decide right away, and she'd call back in a few days. After I hung up, I felt worse than before. Adam suggested I talk to a lawyer who could explain my options without pressuring me either way. He found someone named Liam Waters who specialized in domestic violence cases and had experience with male victims. I met Liam at his office on Tuesday afternoon. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, and he had this calm way of talking that made me feel less anxious. Liam went through everything slowly. The restraining order was temporary right now, but I could extend it. I had strong grounds for divorce based on documented abuse. Rachel couldn't touch our shared assets while the no-contact order was active. If I decided to press charges, the documented injuries and police report would support the case. He never told me what to do, just laid out the facts so I could make informed choices. I left his office with a folder full of papers and a clearer picture of the legal mess ahead of me. The next morning, Kelly showed up at Adam's house. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard her voice outside, loud and angry. Adam opened the door but stood in the doorway blocking her from coming in. Kelly demanded to talk to me, saying her sister would never do what I was claiming. I stayed in the kitchen, but I could hear every word. Kelly said I was a liar and Rachel was the real victim. She said I probably hit Rachel first and now I was playing victim to avoid consequences. Adam told her to leave or he'd call the police. Kelly kept yelling that I'd manipulated everyone and Rachel was sitting in jail because of my lies. Finally, Adam shut the door in her face and locked it. Kelly stood outside shouting for another minute before she left. I sat at the kitchen table shaking, Rachel's voice echoing in my head telling me no one would believe me. Except people did believe me. The police believed me. Adam believed me. Glenn believed me. That night, I looked at the pamphlet the hospital social worker had given me about a domestic violence support group. The next meeting was Thursday evening at a counseling center across town. I almost didn't go. The idea of sitting in a room talking about Rachel beating me made me want to throw up. But I went anyway because staying silent for 4 years hadn't helped. The counseling center was in a small building near the library. I walked in and found the meeting room, and my stomach dropped when I saw 8 women sitting in a circle. I was the only man. I almost walked back out, but a woman with kind eyes and short gray hair waved me over. She introduced herself as Brooke Mansfield, the counselor who ran the group. She said I was welcome and asked me to sit. The other women smiled and nodded, and nobody looked at me like I didn't belong. We went around the circle sharing updates, and I listened to their stories. One woman's husband had broken her arm twice. Another woman's boyfriend had choked her until she passed out. A younger woman talked about her girlfriend throwing things at her head. Their stories were different from mine in details, but the patterns were exactly the same. The violence, the apologies, the excuses, the isolation, the fear. When it was my turn, I said my name and that this was my first time. Brooke said I didn't have to share if I wasn't ready, but the women were nodding encouragement. So I told them about Rachel. I told them about 4 years of being hit and kicked and scratched. I told them about trying to get help and being laughed at. I told them about the night she came at me with glass and called the cops claiming I attacked her. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked skeptical. When I finished, 3 women thanked me for sharing. One said her brother had been abused by his wife and nobody believed him either. Another said male victims face extra barriers because society thinks men can't be hurt by women. Brooke said abuse follows the same patterns regardless of gender, and I deserved support just like anyone else in that room. Driving home from the meeting, I felt lighter than I had in days. Friday afternoon, Jake called. I saw his name on my phone and almost didn't answer, still remembering how he'd laughed when I tried to tell him about Rachel months ago. But I picked up. Jake said he heard what happened from Adam, and he wanted to apologize for not taking me seriously before. He admitted he didn't think a small woman could be genuinely dangerous to a man. He said he was wrong and he was sorry, and if I needed anything, he was there. His apology helped, but something had shifted between us. He'd failed me when I needed support, and I couldn't forget that. I thanked him for calling and said I'd be in touch, but I knew our friendship would never be the same. That weekend, I was scrolling through social media when I got a message request from an account I didn't recognize. The profile had no picture and had been created 2 days ago. The message said it was Rachel, and she needed to talk to me. She said she was getting help and going to therapy. She said she was sorry for everything and begged me to drop the charges. She said we could work through this if I just gave her another chance. My hands started shaking reading her words. Rachel wasn't supposed to contact me at all. The no-contact order was clear. I took screenshots of everything and called Officer Torres. He told me to document all of it and send him the screenshots. He said this violation would strengthen the case against her because it showed she couldn't follow court orders even when facing criminal charges. Monday morning, the prosecutor called back. She said they were moving forward with assault and domestic violence charges against Rachel regardless of whether I testified. The physical evidence was strong enough to proceed without my testimony, though having me testify would help. She explained that domestic violence was a crime against the state, not just against me, so they could prosecute even if I didn't want to participate. I felt relieved and guilty at the same time. Relieved that the decision was out of my hands. Guilty that Rachel would face consequences whether I wanted her to or not. After a week off, I went back to work. My coworkers knew something had happened because Glenn had told them I was dealing with a domestic situation. They treated me with awkward sympathy mixed with obvious curiosity. Nobody asked direct questions, but I caught people staring at the fading bruises on my arms. Glenn pulled me aside during lunch and said he'd told the crew I was handling a serious personal matter, and anyone who had a problem with that could find another job. He said my business was my business and they needed to respect that. Later that afternoon, Liam called saying Rachel's father, Jason, wanted to meet with me. Jason had seen the police report, and it didn't match what Kelly had been telling the family. He wanted to hear my side of the story. Liam said we could meet at his office with him present so I wouldn't be alone. I agreed, even though the idea of facing Rachel's father terrified me. We set up a meeting for Thursday afternoon. I spent the next 3 days nervous about what Jason would say and whether he'd believe his daughter was capable of what she'd done to me. Thursday afternoon, I sat in Liam's office waiting for Jason to arrive. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Liam made small talk about the weather, but I couldn't focus on his words. When Jason walked through the door, he looked older than I remembered from family gatherings. His face was tight and his eyes were red like he'd been crying. He shook my hand and sat down across from me without saying anything at first. Liam explained that Jason wanted to hear my account of what happened with Rachel. I started talking and the words came out in a rush. I told him about the first slap over the dry cleaning and how Rachel cried and made me feel guilty. I described the punches and kicks and how she'd use objects to hurt me. I explained how she'd attack when I was sleeping or relaxed so I couldn't defend myself. Jason's face got paler as I talked. When I showed him the photos on my phone of my injuries, his hands started shaking. The boot print on my ribs, the scratch marks on my neck, the bruises up and down my arms in different colors showing different stages of healing. He stared at the pictures for a long time without speaking. Finally, he looked up at me, and his voice cracked when he said Rachel had always had anger problems even as a kid. She'd throw things and hit her sister Kelly when she didn't get her way. He thought she'd grown out of it. He never imagined she was capable of doing this to another person for 4 years. He apologized over and over, saying he was sorry for what his daughter did to me. He promised he wouldn't try to interfere with the legal case or make excuses for her. Hearing Rachel's own father validate what happened to me made something loosen in my chest. Someone from her family believed me. Jason left after 20 minutes, and I sat in Liam's office feeling drained, but also lighter somehow. 2 weeks later, I signed a lease on a small one-bedroom apartment across town. Adam kept saying I could stay with him as long as I needed, but I felt like I was imposing on his life. His wife was nice about it, but I could tell having me on their couch was getting old. I needed my own space. The apartment was bare with white walls and cheap carpet. The previous tenant had left behind a small dining table, and that was the only furniture I had besides an air mattress Adam lent me. I spent my first night there lying on the air mattress staring at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet. No one was going to burst through the door and attack me. No one was going to hurt me while I slept. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel that constant tension in my shoulders waiting for Rachel to explode. I actually fell asleep without checking the locks 3 times or keeping my phone close in case I needed to call for help. The space was lonely and empty, but it was mine, and I was safe there. A few days after I moved in, Liam called saying Rachel's lawyer had contacted him with a plea deal offer. Rachel would plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for anger management classes and probation instead of jail time. I felt anger rise up hot in my throat. She was already trying to get out of real consequences. Liam explained in his calm lawyer voice that this was standard legal strategy. Defense attorneys always try to get the best deal for their clients. He said I didn't have to agree to anything, and the prosecutor could reject the offer and push for trial. The decision wasn't entirely up to me since domestic violence was a crime against the state, but my input would matter. I told Liam I needed time to think about it. After we hung up, I paced around my empty apartment feeling frustrated. Part of me wanted Rachel to face the maximum punishment for what she did. Another part of me just wanted this whole thing over with, so I could move on with my life. Thursday evening, I went to my second support group meeting at Brooke's Counseling Center. Last time, I just listened to other people share their stories. This time, Brooke asked if I wanted to talk. My mouth went dry, but I nodded. I started at the beginning with meeting Rachel at Adam's wedding. I described the first year when she'd throw things and break dishes. Then I talked about when the hitting started and how it got worse over time. I explained how Rachel would attack me when I was vulnerable and use objects to cause more damage. I told them about the night with the glass and how Rachel called the cops on me, but I was the one with all the injuries. My voice shook when I described Officer Torres finding the bruises and Rachel getting arrested instead of me. When I finished talking, the room was quiet. Then Brooke thanked me for sharing and said it took courage to speak up as a male victim. 2 other women in the group came up to me after and said hearing my story helped them understand that abuse can happen to anyone regardless of size or gender. One of them said her brother had been abused by his girlfriend and the family didn't believe him. She wished she'd known better how to support him. Walking out of the meeting, I felt less alone than I had in years. 3 weeks later, the preliminary hearing arrived. I had to go to the courthouse and testify about what Rachel did to me. Liam met me outside and walked me through what would happen. The prosecutor would ask me questions about the abuse. Rachel's lawyer might cross-examine me. The judge would decide if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. We walked into the courtroom and I saw Rachel sitting at the defense table with her lawyer. She was wearing a conservative dress and had her hair pulled back. She looked small and harmless. When I walked past her, she stared at me with this look I couldn't read. Was it anger or sadness or something else? I sat in the witness chair and the bailiff made me swear to tell the truth. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s named Ms. Smith. She asked me to describe my relationship with Rachel. I explained how we met and got married. Then she asked about the abuse. I had to describe specific incidents out loud in front of strangers. The time Rachel hit me with her curling iron. The time she kicked me so hard I had a boot print on my ribs for 2 weeks. The time she scratched my back until it bled because I was too tired for sex. My face burned with shame as I talked. Even though I was the victim, it felt degrading to admit my wife had beaten me for 4 years, and I'd stayed. Rachel's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. He was an older man in an expensive suit. He asked how tall I was and how much I weighed. I said 6'1" and 200 pounds. He asked how tall Rachel was, 5'2" and maybe 110 pounds. He asked if I ever fought back or restrained her. I said yes when I was defending myself. He asked if I ever left marks on her wrists from grabbing her. I said maybe when I was trying to stop her from hitting me. He started to suggest that I was actually the aggressor and Rachel was defending herself. Ms. Smith objected loudly. The judge told Rachel's lawyer to move on. He asked a few more questions, trying to make me look bad, but Ms. Smith kept objecting. Finally, the judge shut down that whole line of questioning. He said the physical evidence was clear that I had extensive injuries, and Rachel had none except self-inflicted scratches. The implication that I must have done something to deserve being beaten still stung even after the judge dismissed it. The judge took 10 minutes to review the evidence. Then he said there was probable cause to believe Rachel committed assault and domestic violence. The case would proceed to trial. He extended the restraining order for another 6 months. Rachel would have to stay away from me and our house. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt exhausted. My legs were shaky and my head hurt. But I also felt validated. The legal system was taking this seriously. A judge had looked at the evidence and said what happened to me was real and criminal. Liam walked me to my truck and told me I did well on the stand. He said the next step would be trial preparation unless Rachel's lawyer came back with a better plea offer. That weekend, Adam called and invited me to family dinner at our parents' house. I hadn't seen my parents since before Rachel's arrest. Adam had told them what really happened after keeping it from them initially. I drove to their house Sunday afternoon feeling nervous. My mom opened the door and immediately pulled me into a hug. Her eyes were wet with tears. She kept saying she was sorry for not noticing something was wrong. My dad stood behind her looking uncomfortable. We all sat down in the living room and there was this awkward silence. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. He said he owed me an apology. He admitted he didn't think men could be domestic violence victims. He always assumed it was something that happened to women. He felt ashamed of his ignorance. My mom cried and said she should have seen the signs. The times I winced when she hugged me. The way I'd make excuses not to come to family dinners. She blamed herself for not asking more questions. I told them it wasn't their fault. Rachel was good at hiding what she did. She acted normal in public and saved the violence for when we were alone. My dad asked what he could do to help now. I said just believing me was enough. The following week, I had my first appointment with a trauma counselor Liam recommended. His name was Dr. Phillips, and his office was in a quiet building near downtown. He asked me to describe what brought me in for therapy. I explained the 4 years of abuse and Rachel's arrest and the ongoing legal case. Dr. Phillips listened without interrupting. Then he asked how I felt about being abused by my wife. I said I felt ashamed, like I should have been able to stop it or leave sooner. Like there was something wrong with me for staying. Dr. Phillips explained that abusers don't choose victims based on physical strength. They choose people they can manipulate psychologically. Rachel knew how to make me feel guilty and worthless. She knew how to isolate me from people who might help. My size didn't protect me from her manipulation tactics. He said shame was a common response for abuse victims, especially men. Society tells men they should be strong and in control. Admitting you were hurt by a woman goes against everything men are taught about masculinity, but being abused doesn't make me weak or less of a man. It makes me a survivor of domestic violence. 2 days later, Liam called with another update. Rachel's lawyer had made a second plea offer with better terms. She would plead guilty to assault. She'd have to complete mandatory mental health treatment and a domestic violence program. She'd get probation instead of jail time, but it would be longer probation with stricter conditions. Liam said trials were unpredictable. Juries could be sympathetic to small women even when the evidence was clear. This plea deal guaranteed Rachel would face some accountability and get help. It also meant I wouldn't have to testify at a full trial and relive everything again in front of a jury. I told Liam I needed time to think about it. He said that was fine, but the offer wouldn't stay on the table forever. Next few days, I thought about the plea deal constantly. Part of me wanted Rachel to face a full trial and maximum punishment. Another part just wanted everything finished so I could stop living in this legal waiting period. I talked it through in therapy, and Dr. Phillips helped me understand that wanting closure wasn't the same as letting Rachel off easy. The plea deal guaranteed she'd face consequences and get help. A trial was unpredictable. Juries might sympathize with a small woman even with all the evidence. I might have to testify for days and relive every detail in front of strangers. The prosecutor could lose and Rachel could walk away with nothing. I called Liam and told him I'd accept the plea agreement. He said he'd notify the prosecutor, and we'd have a sentencing hearing in about 3 weeks. The sentencing hearing was in a small courtroom with wood paneling and fluorescent lights. I sat behind the prosecutor's table, while Rachel sat at the defense table with her lawyer. She looked thinner than I remembered, and her hair was pulled back tight. The judge was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a stern expression. The prosecutor presented the plea agreement and explained that Rachel would plead guilty to assault in exchange for a domestic violence program, mental health treatment, and 3 years probation. The judge asked Rachel if she understood the terms. Rachel stood up and said yes in a quiet voice. The judge asked if anyone forced her to accept this plea. Rachel said no. Then the judge asked Rachel to state what she did. Rachel took a breath and said she assaulted her husband repeatedly over 4 years. Hearing her admit it out loud in an official proceeding made something loosen in my chest. The judge accepted the plea and moved to sentencing. She said domestic violence was unacceptable regardless of the victim's gender. She said society often dismissed male victims, but the law protected everyone equally. She told Rachel that her size didn't excuse her violence, and that abuse was about power and control, not physical strength. Rachel stood there with her head down while the judge spoke. Then the judge sentenced her according to the plea terms and added that any violation of probation or the no-contact order would result in immediate jail time. Court was dismissed, and I walked out into the hallway feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight wasn't completely gone, but it had shifted somehow. I met with Liam the following week to start divorce proceedings. He explained that given the criminal case and restraining order, the divorce should be straightforward. We didn't have kids, and I wasn't seeking alimony or support payments. I just wanted a clean separation and to never be legally tied to Rachel again. Liam filed the paperwork and served Rachel through her lawyer. She didn't contest anything. Her lawyer sent back signed papers agreeing to the divorce terms within 2 weeks. Liam said this was probably the fastest uncontested divorce he'd handled in years. I felt grateful it was simple, even though the reason it was simple was because Rachel had destroyed our marriage. So completely, there was nothing left to fight over. A few days after the divorce papers were filed, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Jason Townsend, Rachel's father. He said he wanted me to know he was helping Rachel find a good therapist who specialized in anger management and trauma. He said Rachel was starting to understand what she'd done and why. He said he hoped someday I might be willing to hear a genuine apology from her. I told him I appreciated that he was helping Rachel get treatment. I said I was glad she was working on herself, but I also said I wasn't ready for any contact with Rachel, and I might never be ready. Jason was quiet for a moment, then said he understood. He thanked me for being honest and said he respected my boundaries. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling complicated emotions. I did hope Rachel got better and figured out her issues, but that didn't mean I needed to be part of her recovery process. My mom called that weekend and invited me to Sunday dinner. She said they were having pot roast and she'd really like me to come. I drove to my parents' house feeling nervous even though I'd seen them several times since Rachel's arrest. Dinner was me, my parents, Adam and Adam's wife. My mom kept the conversation light, asking about work and my apartment. After we ate, my mom brought out coffee and pie. She sat down next to me and said she wanted to tell me something. She said she was proud of how I handled an impossible situation. She said leaving abuse took courage, and going through the legal process took strength. My dad nodded and said he agreed. Adam reached over and squeezed my shoulder. The family support I'd been missing during the abuse years was finally here. It felt healing even though I wished they'd noticed sooner and helped me earlier. But they were here now, and that mattered. 6 months after Rachel's arrest, I had a therapy appointment that felt different. Dr. Phillips and I reviewed how much had changed since I first walked into his office. I had my own apartment where I felt safe. I had regular contact with my family who believed and supported me. I was doing well at work. The divorce was moving forward. Rachel was in treatment and staying away from me. Dr. Phillips said I'd made significant progress in rebuilding my self-worth and sense of safety. He suggested we transition from weekly sessions to monthly check-ins. He said I was moving from crisis management to maintaining my mental health. I agreed that felt right. I still had hard days and moments of anger or fear, but they were manageable now instead of overwhelming. 8 months after Rachel's arrest, the divorce was finalized. Liam called to tell me the judge had signed the final decree. I was legally single again, no longer tied to my abuser in any official way. The paperwork arrived in the mail a few days later. I sat at my kitchen table holding the document that said my marriage to Rachel Townsend was dissolved. It felt like permission to fully move forward. I put the decree in a folder and filed it away. That chapter was closed. Brooke from support group called and asked if I'd be interested in attending a regional domestic violence awareness event where she was speaking. I said sure and asked what it was about. She said it was for advocates, counselors, and survivors. Then she asked if I'd be willing to share my story briefly as an example of male victimhood. I hesitated because talking to a room full of strangers felt scary, but Brooke said representation mattered and male victims needed to be visible. I agreed to do it. The event was at a community center downtown. About 60 people filled the room. Brooke gave a presentation about recognizing domestic violence in all its forms. Then she introduced me and I walked to the front. I told a shortened version of my story, focusing on the 4 years of abuse and how hard it was to be believed as a male victim. I talked about the night Rachel was arrested and the legal process that followed. When I finished, several people clapped. Afterward, 3 different advocates came up to thank me for representing an often invisible population. A woman told me her brother was abused by his girlfriend, and she didn't know how to help him. I gave her information about the men's support group. Speaking publicly felt empowering instead of shameful. Curtis and I started meeting for coffee outside of group sessions. We'd sit at a cafe near downtown and talk about rebuilding our lives after abuse. He understood things without needing explanation. The dating anxiety, the trust issues, the random triggers that came out of nowhere. Having a friend who genuinely got it felt invaluable. Curtis was further along in his recovery than me. He'd been out of his abusive relationship for 3 years. He gave me hope that things continued to get better with time. At work, Glenn called me into his office one afternoon. He said he'd been thinking about the future of the business. He was 65 and wanted to start semi-retiring in the next few years. He said he'd been watching me lead the crew and handle difficult jobs. He offered me a partnership opportunity. I'd buy in over time and eventually take over the day-to-day operations while he stepped back. I was stunned. Glenn said I'd earned it through my leadership skills and work ethic. The professional opportunity felt like proof that I was capable of success and growth, despite what Rachel told me for 4 years. I accepted, and we shook hands. Curtis and I started going to a coffee shop near his apartment. The woman who worked there was friendly and always remembered our orders. Her name was Nyla. She had dark curly hair and an easy smile. After a few weeks, she started chatting with us beyond just taking orders. One day, she asked if we wanted to join a trivia night the shop was hosting. Curtis couldn't make it, but I said yes. Nyla and I ended up on the same team. We came in second place and laughed about the questions we got wrong. Afterward, she asked if I wanted to get dinner sometime. I said yes, but then immediately felt anxious. I told her I needed to be honest about something first. We sat down, and I explained that I'd recently gotten out of an abusive marriage. I said I was still working through things in therapy, and I needed to take things slowly. Nyla listened without judgment. She said she appreciated my honesty. She said slow sounded good to her, too. We went to dinner the following week and talked for 3 hours. She was easy to be with, patient and kind. Taking things slowly helped me learn to trust again without rushing or forcing anything. About 6 months into the probation period, Liam forwarded me an official letter from Rachel's domestic violence program counselor. The letter stated that Rachel had completed all required sessions with perfect attendance and demonstrated significant progress in recognizing abusive patterns and developing healthier coping mechanisms. The counselor noted that Rachel took full responsibility for her actions during group discussions and showed genuine remorse for the harm she caused. I read the letter twice while sitting at my kitchen table. Part of me felt genuinely glad she was getting help and working on herself. Another part remembered the boot print on my ribs and the nights sleeping in my truck. Her growth was good for her and maybe for whoever she dated next, but it didn't erase 4 years of violence or obligate me to forgive anything. I filed the letter away and went back to my dinner. The 1-year anniversary of Rachel's arrest fell on a Thursday. I took Friday off work and drove up to the mountains with Adam for a weekend camping trip. We set up tents near a lake and spent Saturday fishing and talking about how different life looked now. I had my own apartment with furniture I picked out myself. I had the promotion to crew leader and respect from my coworkers. I had healthy friendships with people who believed me and supported me. Most importantly, I could fall asleep in my own bed without wondering if I'd wake up to pain. Adam grilled steaks that night and we sat by the fire watching stars. He told me he was proud of how far I'd come. I told him I couldn't have done it without him letting me crash on his couch that first night. Support group had become something I looked forward to every Tuesday evening. Brooke ran the sessions with warmth and structure, creating a space where people felt safe sharing their worst moments. After one meeting about 3 months into my regular attendance, Brooke pulled me aside. She explained that the center wanted to start a men's-only group specifically for male domestic violence victims since many men felt uncomfortable in mixed groups. She asked if I'd be willing to co-facilitate with her, helping other men feel less alone the way Curtis and the group helped me. I agreed immediately. The idea of turning my experience into something useful felt meaningful. We scheduled the first men's group meeting for the following month. Nyla and I had been dating for 4 months when I decided it was time to introduce her to my family. My mother invited us to Sunday dinner along with Adam and his wife. I was nervous driving over because family approval mattered, even though I was 32 years old. Nyla charmed everyone by asking my mother about her garden and genuinely listening to the answers. After dinner, my mother pulled me into the kitchen while Nyla talked with Adam in the living room. She hugged me tight and said she could see how happy I was. She said Nyla seemed kind and patient, and the way we interacted felt healthy and equal. I realized she was right. With Nyla, I never felt anxious about saying the wrong thing or making a mistake. We disagreed sometimes, but worked through it with conversation instead of violence. The relationship was built on mutual respect rather than fear, which was something I'd never experienced before. Glenn called me into his office on a Wednesday afternoon and shut the door. He said he'd been thinking seriously about the partnership offer he made months ago. He wanted to move forward with the paperwork if I was still interested. I'd been saving money and preparing for this possibility, so I said yes. We shook hands and Glenn explained the timeline for buying in and transitioning responsibilities. Over the next few weeks, I started taking on more business tasks like client consultations, project bidding, and crew scheduling. The work was challenging but satisfying. Building something positive and having real ownership in the company reinforced that I was capable and valuable. Every successful project felt like proof that Rachel was wrong when she called me useless and pathetic. Curtis called me one evening sounding excited and nervous. He said he had news. His boyfriend of 8 months had proposed during a weekend trip to the coast. Curtis said yes. He invited me to the engagement party the following Saturday at his boyfriend's apartment. I showed up with a bottle of wine and found a room full of people celebrating. Curtis introduced me to his fiancée, a graphic designer named Noah, who seemed genuinely kind and made Curtis laugh constantly. Watching them together gave me hope for my own future. Curtis had been through hell with his ex-boyfriend's abuse, worse than what I experienced in some ways. Seeing him build a healthy relationship after that trauma proved that recovery was possible and happiness wasn't reserved for people without scars. At the party, I looked around at Curtis, at Brooke, who showed up to celebrate, at Adam, who came with his wife, and realized I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being. That realization hit differently than I expected. Liam called me on a Tuesday morning and said he'd received a letter from Rachel through her lawyer. She was asking if I'd be willing to meet with her so she could apologize in person as part of her recovery program. The letter emphasized that she understood if I said no and wouldn't contact me again either way. I told Liam I needed time to think about it. That evening at therapy, I brought up the request. My therapist asked what I wanted to do, not what I should do. I realized I wasn't ready to see Rachel. Maybe I'd never be ready. The thought of sitting across from her, even in a supervised setting, made my chest tight. After talking it through with my therapist and then with Brooke at group, I decided to decline. I told Liam to send a response saying I appreciated that Rachel was working on herself, but I wasn't ready for contact and might never be. That was okay. My healing didn't require forgiving her or helping with her recovery process. The men's domestic violence support group held its first meeting with 8 guys showing up. Brooke and I co-facilitated, creating ground rules and letting everyone introduce themselves. Hearing their stories reminded me of my own early days in group. The shame, the confusion about being male victims, the fear that nobody would believe them. One guy named Jameson had been strangled by his girlfriend multiple times. Another named Michael had a wife who threw kitchen knives at him. A younger guy named Tyler was still living with his abusive boyfriend because he had nowhere else to go. After the meeting ended, several of them thanked me for being willing to share my experience. Jameson said it helped knowing someone further along in recovery. Helping other male victims navigate their situations reinforced how far I'd come from that night the police arrived. Sharing my story to help others felt purposeful, like my trauma could be transformed into something meaningful instead of just damage I carried. Nyla and I had been dating for 10 months when we started discussing moving in together. I was surprised by how natural the conversation felt and how safe the idea sounded. With Rachel, living together meant constant vigilance and unpredictable violence. With Nyla, cohabitation meant shared grocery shopping and movie nights on the couch. We found a 2-bedroom apartment with good light and signed the lease together. Moving day felt significant. I unpacked my belongings into our shared space without fear. We established healthy communication patterns from the start. If something bothered one of us, we talked about it. If we disagreed, we worked through it with respect. Nyla never raised her voice in anger, never threw objects, never made me feel worthless. I finally understood what a real partnership should feel like. The relationship was built on trust and equality instead of control and fear. Curtis's wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in early fall. I brought Nyla as my date, and we sat with Brooke and some other friends from group. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Curtis and Noah exchanged vows they wrote themselves, promising to support each other through difficulties and celebrate each other's successes. During the reception, I danced with Nyla and watched Curtis beam with happiness. I found myself thinking about how 2 years ago, I was trapped in an abusive marriage, believing I deserved the violence because Rachel convinced me I was lucky she stayed. Now I stood at my friend's wedding, holding hands with someone who treated me with kindness, working as a partner in a successful business, and genuinely happy most days. The contrast felt surreal. I still had occasional nightmares and moments where loud noises made me flinch. Trust remained difficult sometimes, and I still attended therapy monthly. but the overwhelming feeling was gratitude for escaping and rebuilding. Curtis caught my eye across the dance floor and raised his glass. I raised mine back, both of us understanding without words what it meant to survive abuse and find happiness on the other side. My therapist and I sat in his office on a Tuesday afternoon, talking about how far I'd come since those first sessions, where I could barely speak without breaking down. She told me we could move to monthly check-ins instead of weekly visits because I'd done so much work rebuilding my life and processing the trauma. I agreed it felt right, though part of me worried about losing that weekly anchor. She reminded me I had tools now for managing the hard moments, and I could always schedule extra sessions if needed. I still woke up some nights from dreams where Rachel was chasing me with something sharp, and sometimes loud noises made me flinch before I could stop myself. Trust remained difficult when meeting new people, and I caught myself watching for warning signs in every interaction. But these struggles felt manageable now instead of overwhelming, like old injuries that ached in bad weather, but didn't stop me from living my life. I left her office feeling proud of the progress I'd made and ready to keep moving forward at my own pace. Glenn called me into his office on a Friday morning, and I walked in expecting to discuss a new project or client complaint. Instead, he handed me papers showing partnership agreements and profit-sharing arrangements, making it official that I was now part owner of the electrical business. He shook my hand and told me this was about recognizing my leadership and skill, not charity or pity for what I'd been through. The whole crew gathered in the shop after lunch, and Glenn announced the partnership while everyone clapped and cheered. My coworkers who'd supported me through the worst of everything came up to congratulate me one by one, and several of them mentioned they were glad to see me thriving after everything Rachel put me through. The achievement felt earned through years of hard work and dedication to the job, proof that I was capable and valuable despite what my ex-wife spent years telling me. We ordered pizza for everyone and spent the afternoon celebrating instead of working, and I realized this was what healthy professional relationships looked like when people genuinely respected each other. I was pushing my cart through the produce section at the grocery store 3 weeks later when I spotted Jason near the apples examining fruit. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, but I forced myself to keep walking because avoiding Rachel's father forever wasn't realistic in a town this size. He saw me and walked over with a careful expression, asking how I was doing in a tone that suggested he genuinely wanted to know. I told him I was good, that life had improved a lot since everything happened with his daughter. He nodded and said Rachel was doing better too, attending her therapy sessions and working on her anger issues, but he understood I'd moved on, and he respected that decision. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes before we both said goodbye and continued shopping, and I felt nothing except a neutral acknowledgement that we were living separate lives now. No panic rose in my chest, no anger burned in my stomach, just a calm acceptance that Rachel's recovery was her journey and mine was mine. I finished my shopping and drove home feeling like that brief encounter proved I'd healed more than I realized. 2 years had passed since that Thursday night when Officer Torres saw my injuries and arrested Rachel instead of me. I woke up next to Nyla in our shared apartment, where I felt safe every single morning, and I drove to work as a business partner, instead of just an employee taking orders. My friendships with Curtis and others from support group gave me people who understood what I'd survived without judgment, and my family relationships had healed now that everyone knew the truth. Most days I felt genuinely happy instead of just pretending to be okay, and when hard moments came, I had healthy ways to handle them. The scars from Rachel's abuse hadn't disappeared completely, because 4 years of violence leaves marks that don't fully fade. I still had moments where I caught myself checking exits in crowded rooms or tensing when someone moved too quickly near me. Sometimes I wondered if I'd ever stop being hyper-aware of other people's moods and potential anger. But these remnants of trauma no longer defined who I was or limited what I could do with my life. I'd learned that surviving domestic violence wasn't something to hide or feel ashamed about, and rebuilding afterward was something to be genuinely proud of accomplishing. My life looked nothing like I'd imagined during those years trapped with Rachel, and that difference felt like the greatest victory possible.